This morning, I want to come and tell you things you might already know about me, about my family. But for those of you who don't, I am not a sentimental man. I don't have things exactly that I treasure. I don't have a watch that was my grandfather's grandfather's. I don't use the wallet that was used by my father. I don't have that sort of part in me. But I do have an odd interest in milestones. When I was a child, I remember my father drove a truck his whole life, as far as I know, and we had this beige-colored dry erase board with a tiny little white marker on the side of our refrigerator in the kitchen. Now you have to understand, as I've said many times, my father and I joke that I grew up in a museum. There was no dust and nothing moved. You could even play a trick on Mom. You could go up to something and go, and scoot it, and it would be moved by the time you came back to it. Everything has its place, and it will be in its place. So I grew up with the same, this is weird, but follow me. I grew up with the same refrigerator my entire life. So the refrigerator, the washer, and the dryer, they all matched. They were all copper colored. And they were built back when tanks were being made out of pots and pans, I guess. And they made the same parts they had for tanks, they made this refrigerator out of. Now, it probably wasn't the most energy efficient machine on the planet, but it refused to die. And so this copper colored refrigerator was not like some kids' refrigerators where if you drew a picture, it got hung on the refrigerator. If you did a good grade on a test, it got hung. No, because that's not the place for that. You don't put stuff on the refrigerator. So it sticks out in my mind, this beige-colored dry erase board was allowed to be, and it stood out against that copper-colored refrigerator. Well, she's shaking her head, but she even knows the dry erase board I'm talking about. Really? They were talking about I didn't tell them about this. My dad used to write notes to us. He'd come in early. He'd write a note on the dry erase board. Especially on a Saturday, you'd get up and Dad would have stopped and bought us donuts and written on the dry erase board, "Love y'all," but he's asleep and we're up because, truck drivers are nocturnal sometimes. I remember the time I got up, there was breakfast waiting on me and a big long note on that dry erase board from my father because I had turned 13. And he was telling me that now I was a young man. And he was proud of me. And all these things. I had reached this milestone. That dry erase board never had another thing written on it because I framed it and I had it on my dresser in my bedroom for the rest of my youth. In fact, it's in a frame in a box right now at home. No other words were written on that dry erase board because it was a marker of a milestone. I remember when I got married to my wife and I told her early on, I want to have reached the point where I have been married to you longer than I lived without you. So there was this milestone in my mind. See, Becky and I got married when we had just turned 20 years old. So she turned 20 in June, I turned 20 in July, we got married in August. And so I told her from the beginning, I am aimed at the moment in which I can say I have been with you longer than I've been without you. Now she wants to fudge. Well, we started dating 3 years before that, so you've been with me 3 years longer than you're saying. That's what she would tell me. I'm like, yeah, but officially, that license has a date on it. And I want to be one day past that day so that I can say to myself and to anybody who asks, I've been with her longer than I was without her. And I had, up until that was true for me, there was the tiniest amount of envy in my heart for every person who could say that. Every time at church that we'd recognize someone's 50th anniversary or 30th anniversary, and I would know what age, they got married young or whatever, I'd be like, man, I'm going that way. I'm going to make it to that line. I'm going to cross that spot. I've joked a bunch of times about wanting to pastor this church 7 years and a day. Because the longest pastor in the church's history was 7 years. So 7 years and a day was a big day for Mason. It wasn't a big day for anybody else. Nobody else knew it was happening. But boy, I woke up that morning and I was like, did it. Now I moved that marker. Now I want to double the record, see. August 1st was 13 years. Next year on August 2nd, if you remember it, you can remember that I'll be walking around that day. Did it. I like those milestones. I like those markers. Well, Becky and I reach another type of milestone and marker on Tuesday. Because on Tuesday, I'll be able to tell people I've been married to my wife for a quarter of a century. It will have been 25 years on August 15th of this year. And then I was thinking through that. God said, you've done something else that you're forgetting. You remember how big of a deal it was that you were able to say, I've been married to Becky longer than I lived without her. And I said, yeah, I remember that. And then literally, I'm not lying to you, it was like I was having a conversation with God. And he said, do you remember that? Yeah, I remember that. That's a big deal. In my mental bank, I don't care about watches and trinkets and whose clock that was. And my mother will tell you she likes art and things, and she'll always say, when I'm gone, you're just going to sell this. And I've told her I'm going to have a yard sale after the funeral. Like, hey, thank y'all for coming. If you'd come by the house, you can buy because I don't care about that stuff. I care about her. He said, well, you made another one. You just didn't pay attention. I'm like, what? So I'm thinking, wait a minute, how long have I been married? Or wait a minute, how old are we? When Becky and I get to August 15th on Tuesday, our married life will have been spent, more of it here than when we weren't here. We had been married 12 years when we got here. Tuesday, we will have been here 13 years, married. The reason that's a big milestone when I think about it is because you have been my family longer than you haven't been in my marriage. You have been with me for the majority of my time together with Becky. It wasn't always the case, and I had to stick around long enough to earn that mile marker. But it's a big deal to me. So I was reflecting on being married to someone that is your absolute best friend for 25 years and reflecting on this past June when literally we needed a kind of break that we had never needed or had before. And during that time period that we were away, the gentleman who was helping us, part of the duo, the husband and wife that were helping us, he mentioned something about your health as a church being a reflection of our health as a couple. And I had never heard this before. So I came home and I looked up different reflections on that idea. And I stumbled across this by Warren Wiersbe, a very well-known Christian author and pastor. In his book on being a servant of God, which, by the way, if it's not obvious based on the title, this is a text written to ministers. This is a text written to pastors. And so this statement is to me. Remember, the best thing you can do for your ministry is build a godly family. And the best thing you can do for your family is to build a ministry that glorifies God. Home and ministry are friends, not enemies. And it's your job to keep them that way. So when I have felt tired long enough, you know what I have experienced with my faith family? You get tired. And when we dust ourselves off and pray for renewed focus and strength, I see a reflection where you find new drive to do the crazy, wild, and wonderful things that God has called us to. I never knew and never could have known, I guess, how connected we are. Now that might sound stupid, and I might be dumb for not knowing it, but when that man said that, and then I thought about how now we've been together longer than we've been apart from you, it became all the more important that I use today. Now, is it everybody's opportunity to be able to do this? No. So this is one of those situations where it's a perk of the calling. But today I want to use my marriage to reflect on commitment and recognize how my marriage and commitment are nothing more than examples of how all of us have been called to a marriage relationship with Jesus Christ, and how He is asking us for that same level of commitment. Psalm 37, verse 5 and 6 say this: "Commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in Him, and He will do it. He will bring out your righteousness as the light and your judgment as the noonday." I read that over and over, and two words kept jumping out: commit and do. Commit and do. Read a story once about an older woman who was sharing her testimony at a church, and this was shortly after her husband of 42 years had passed away, and she was talking about what their life had been like, what that journey had been like, what it had meant to have a companion through life's experiences for 42 years, how God had used them to do things, how they had stumbled and scuffed their knee. And there in the church that morning was a young man who had just gone through a life-shattering breakup. He had been engaged to this woman. He thought everything was perfect, but then he made choices that were wrong, and he had to pay for those by having the ring returned to him. And so he thought to himself, there is absolutely no way I will ever have what that woman is talking about. So after it was over and the woman had shared her testimony, the pastor encouraged everyone, as I have plenty of times, to come and thank her for her words and love her. And he walked up to her and he said, "I wish I could find what you had with your husband." And that old woman said, "Oh, honey, I didn't find it. We built it." See, the trick is, everything good that we see, we often forget the amount of work that it took for it to exist. For the great glory given to me through Jesus Christ, I sometimes am tempted to pay so much attention to the glory, I forget what had to happen for me to fully receive it. She's told that young man, "Oh, we didn't find that. We built that. We worked at that." Instead, she told him, it's better to think that we looked at one another and said, "This is a field where something good could grow. Let's work it together." Because you can't be committed and not have to do. Now, when the psalmist is telling us this in Psalm 37, he says, "You commit your way." What that way doesn't mean wandering. It means you commit what you do to the Lord, and He will do what He told you. So commitment includes doing, because what are you committing? Now, when I tell people I tricked her into marrying me, that's not true. It wasn't a trick. I just like to say that because you don't have to tell me I was, as they say, punching above my weight class. She is the better, in my opinion, of the partnership. She has to do things no one else understands. She has to put up with what no one else has put up with in me. And no matter what you think about how I look every Sunday morning, is it stupid to have a blue tie and an orange shirt on this morning? I don't know, but guess who had to give me the thumbs up? She did. Every dumb thing, good thing, healthy thing, or bad thing I've done, I've probably looked to her to approve it, whether it should have been fair to have that be her responsibility or not. She is excellent. But if all I ever did was tell her what I thought of her while I ran around, cheated, stole, hid, denied, avoided every responsibility that was mine, what sort of commitment is that? And likewise, if I tell Jesus Christ I want the fullness of His glory, I want to receive salvation, I want to be considered righteousness according to His shed blood, and then I run right off and hide in a hole with the devil for the rest of my life, did I mean what I said? How do I know? What I realize now, 25 years later, and have been having the glory of realizing through very good example in my own parents and the other experiences that Becky and I have had all 28 total years together, I realize that commitment is proven through two things: time and work. That's how you prove commitment. You let time pass and you do the work. Why? How does the Bible explain that this is how these things work? How does this both connect me to my wife and me to my Savior? How does this make my family a reflection of my church family and my church family, both of them an ultimate reflection of my purpose and place in His kingdom and my relationship with that family? Well, I'm going to give you 3 things that I feel like testify to the truth. Time and work. Well, time passing lets work happen. 1, because it lets small things grow bigger. Small things grow big when time passes and work is done. In Matthew 13, 31 and 32, the little ones had this as a children's moment not so long ago. Miss Linda even caught and captured their attention with a Ziploc bag of mustard seeds. Tiny, tiny little things. But in a whole series of parables where we pulled our theme for Bible school, where she pulled that truth of the mustard seed through this whole little area of parables, Jesus says this about that mustard seed. He presented them this parable, the Bible says, and Jesus spoke these words. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a person took and sowed in his field. And this is smaller. It's small, smaller than all the other seeds, but when it is fully grown, it is larger than the garden plants and becomes a tree so that the birds of the sky come and nest in its branches. Now, when you look at a mustard seed and you look at what is, I'm not a herbologist or whatever you call it, a plant expert. Why do they call it, some people say, oh, that's a mustard bush. Man, that's a tree. That's like people saying a crepe myrtle is just a bush. That thing is a tree. That's a tree. But that thing grows up so big from such a tiny, tiny seed. But does it happen the minute you put it in the dirt? No, and that's the problem with trying to use seeds as examples for children. You don't realize that while you're trying to teach them about how things grow, you're also getting the chance to teach them about having patience. Because you put that seed in the dirt and maybe you forgot, but I got some elementary experience in here. Those children will go look at that dirt every day. Did it come out? Did it grow? Is it? And for a week, it's just still dirt. But without fail, they go back, they go back, they go back. Did we put water on it yet? They need to tend to that little styrofoam cup with that seed in it. And then one day they go look and there's this tiny little green stem sticking out. And then it's a big day. It's hard to teach math on the day they saw the green thing coming out of the cup. Because all they want to do is stare at it. Stare at it. We have a saying that's like watching paint dry. Well, to a kid, that must be the grandest thing in their whole life because they'll just stare at that little green thing. Oh, wow. And they tend to it. They take care of it. And if that attitude stays the same, that little tiny thing grows bigger and bigger and bigger until it has to be moved from that styrofoam cup to a place that's bigger. And it grows and it grows and it grows. But none of that happened the day they stuck that in the dirt. Because it needed time. And it didn't just need time, it needed to be cared for. It needed to have work done for it. Because if I just stick it in that cup and put it in the corner, and nary does a drop of water touch it, it maybe will have enough juice to poke out of the dirt, but what will it quickly do? Die. Just like some of the relationships that you and I are familiar with. Relationships that were planted, but they weren't worked. They weren't tended. They weren't seen after. But if I want a small thing to get bigger, if I want to look at what somebody has, if I want to know the grand and glorious stuff that Jesus has planned for me, I have to be patient with the small before it gets big. Jesus I can speak English, I promise. Jesus told another parable where he said it's about money and somebody's given money and somebody's given more money and somebody's given more money and they have to invest it. And he says, to him who is faithful in a little, I will give him less to do, fewer responsibilities, more. The misinterpretation of people with that parable is they think it's all about the money. Jesus says, if you're faithful in a little, I will give you much. The context is, if you'll take care of one thing, when I show up again, I'll give you 2 things to do. And if you're faithful with 2, I'll show up and give you 3 or 4 or 5. Well, we all envy the spiritual giant in our life that is responsible for 30 things, and we want to be just like them, or we envy. You know what I want? And I don't say this with any sort of pride. I even thought about saying, hey, honey, make sure you dress in something that makes you feel pretty, because I might say things that make people want to look at you. But then I realized I want to look at her all the time, so what does it matter what she wears? But I want you. I'm not lying, or I'm not saying this to be prideful or braggadocious. I want you to be loved the way I love my wife. I want you to have that. I want every marriage reflected in this room to be like mine. Not exactly, not a carbon copy. I don't want you to have to put up with my stupidities. That is her punishment, okay? I'm not asking you to have a Mason in your life. I'm saying I wish you were the kind of best friend that I am with her. And maybe that's not for everybody. I want to be everywhere she is all the time. From the moment we became buddies, we were just always together. And in those 2 people, we found that, you know where I'm happiest? Wherever you are. So I totally get it. Some guys are like, she needs to take a shopping trip. She needs to go I need some time with the boys. I get that. I just don't have that. Because instead, I just want to be where she is. In her, I found an absolute best buddy. And whatever that looks like for other people, I just want them to have it. But let me tell you something. In 1996, when I took her to senior prom, the relationship then was absolutely nothing like the relationship is today. It started small. And today, maybe for some people that I don't know this, it's not like people walk up and say, did you happen to, I don't know. In fact, I'm too stupid to really be paying attention to that kind of stuff. Maybe I'm the example for somebody. Maybe we're the example for somebody. I don't know. I'm not overly bothered by that. But I know that what started tiny, what started as, do you like me because I like you? In fact, just tell the stories. I got 28 years of story. I got longer than that because we were in first grade together. But she was such a smart aleck, I just knew if I told her I liked her, she was going to laugh in my face. And so when finally, somehow, it becomes obvious and known that, do you like me? Circle yes or no. I didn't actually do that. I had grown past that. I mean, I use that technique in other places, but, other times in the 5th grade, I was like, do you like me? Circle yes or no. Oh, so serious, Okay, but do you like me? Yes. Well, I like you too. Okay, do you want to be boyfriend, girlfriend? Yes. First date? McDonald's. McDonald's. Didn't even go inside, sat in the parking lot. Ate double cheeseburgers. Didn't know it at the time, but it was Star Wars Day, our first date. Still have the receipt because she keeps that kind of stuff. From May 4th, 1995. McDonald's, Shelby Drive and Hacks Cross. Wait, I don't know. I could get you there. It's a little scary now, but I could get you there where that McDonald's is. And all we did was talk. That's all we did. We just talked and talked and talked and talked. Small. Seemed big then, but now let me tell you something after 28 years later, 25 years of marriage, let me tell you something. I don't have to say a word. I don't have to say anything. In fact, there's been a couple of times where I'll say, would you just let me say it first? It didn't start that way, though. Because for real commitment to take place, I have to let a small thing grow. It doesn't come to me big. Just like your relationship with Jesus has been asked by Him that you be tended in the same way. That you let that small thing of. Today, I'm sorry, and please don't be upset. Today I had a mama come up to me and say, I want you to talk to my little one about baptism. That's very exciting. And I'm super excited to have that conversation. Let me tell you something that keeps happening in the world today that we have to fight against, and it's this problem. We have been fed a bowl of lies when as parents we think the only job you got cradling that little one is to make sure they have enough faith to tell the preacher they want to get baptized so that they can get baptized, and hey, now you're done. Now you're finished. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to keep living a life of faith in front of them. You don't have to protect their innocence, because the minute they profess their desire, the minute they say, but I am in love with Jesus, just like you talk about, just like I see around me when I go to church with all those other people, I want that. That's why I want to be like that. I want to be a Christian. Well, the minute that happens, guess who wants to devour them? But we don't build a fence around them. We don't protect them. We don't get dad out there with the sword to stab that lion in the mouth. We don't get mom back behind dad saying, hey, honey, you need me to sharpen that? We don't do that. We get them in the water and then we're like, see ya. And so what happens to them when they become teenagers? Let me ask it a different way. Why is teenage pregnancy a problem? Why is drug use and addiction such an issue in the teenage years in America? If they were all sold out and dedicated to the Lord, where was their growth? Who tended that dirt? You see, we're given things when they're small. We're supposed to see to it that they grow big. And that comes from commitment, because commitment is time and work. What else have I learned about God, about my marriage? I've learned that because of commitment, because of time being combined with work, practice makes perfect. Now make no mistake, you cannot be perfect down here. You can find churches in this community that will tell you you can. I would choose to tell you that the Bible says they're lying. Perhaps with the best intention, but you cannot, according to that Bible, live perfectly on earth. It is not until you have been glorified in the presence of Jesus Christ that takes place. But that doesn't mean we're not supposed to aim at perfect. That doesn't mean we're not supposed to try to be better than what we are by default. And I'll give you an example of that in the Bible, where we see someone practicing at being a disciple, at being forgiving, at working out things, and it changing who they are, who somebody else was, and the importance of both relationships. This is found so blatantly in the life of a man named Paul. Maybe you've heard of him. And another man named John Mark. Now, you've maybe heard me tell you before, because it's true, John Mark, referenced in the book of Acts, is the mark of the gospel according to Mark. So when you read in the book of Acts about a young man named John Mark, who eventually becomes quite a close companion of Peter, perhaps you've heard of him also, and Peter refers to John Mark as his spiritual son, just like Paul refers to Timothy as his. So this is quite a serious relationship as mentor and mentee, we might say. That's John Mark. Well, see, Paul didn't like him. Paul thought he was a washout. We might say Paul thought he was a bum. How do I know? In Acts chapter 15. Verses 36 through 38, Luke tells us further about the growing of the church, and specifically about these two guys who had a serious hand in some really good things taking place, Paul and Barnabas. Well, in Acts 15:36, the Bible says, after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, let's return and visit the brothers and sisters in every city in which we proclaim the word of the Lord, and let's see how they are. And Barnabas, the Bible continues, wanted to take John, called Mark, along with them. But Paul was of the opinion that they should not take along with them this man who had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not gone on in the work with them. Paul's like, I don't want that washout with me. Now Barnabas, this is the guy who can encourage anybody. Barnabas' nickname in the Bible, in the New Testament, in study, is the encourager. So if I say to you one day, man, your words are like Barnabas, I mean, you are encouraging me with what you're saying. But right there in Acts 15 is the last time those two men, best friends, Paul and Barnabas. But in Acts 15, that is the last time they are spoken of being together. They are never together again, because of this disagreement about John Mark, which tells us what? That was a serious disagreement. Now, what is it referring to? Well, if you like to keep up with this stuff, Acts 13:13, so 2 chapters previous to this, it says, "Now Paul and his companions put out to sea from Paphos and came to Perga and Pamphylia, but John left them and returned to Jerusalem." According to antiquity, the idea is John was a young man and he thought to himself, basically, I can't handle this, I can't do this, I just want to go home. And so he did. And Paul held that against him. And so when it came time to go on a second missionary journey, Paul says, let's go, brother. Let's go back to those places. Let's go check in on them. And Barnabas says, heck yeah, let's take Mark with us. And Paul's like, I'm going without you. And they split forever. But Paul is committed to the gospel. And the gospel says to forgive. The gospel says to restore. The gospel says to see what God sees in the people around you. So then I find 2 Timothy 4:11. And in 2 Timothy 4:11, by the way, now Paul, an old man. A middle-aged man in Acts chapter 15, but an old man in 2 Timothy. This is the last letter that he knowingly, according to us and what we have access to, this is the last thing he ever writes, this letter. And at chapter 4, verse 11 is at the close of that letter. And Paul says this, only Luke is with me. He's asking Timothy to come to him. He says, because only Luke is with me. He's been abandoned by everyone else. Take Mark and bring him with you because he is useful to me for service. Well, that's the same guy. That's the same John Mark that Paul broke his relationship with Barnabas over. Except now, after all these years of being committed to the gospel and practicing what Jesus commanded of all of his disciples, now Paul sees John Mark and says, bring that man to me. He is useful to me. He is good for me. You see, he has perfected his understanding of the gospel, and clearly, though it's not written out, I wish it were, but it's not, but just by his request of John Mark, we know that reconciliation has taken place, yeah? He's clearly made peace with John Mark, because before, all those years ago, he didn't even want to be with him. I don't even want to be in the company of this loser. But now, bring him to me. He's useful. Get him. Get him to come. Paul had practiced, and it was becoming perfect in him. It was becoming right in him. In my marriage, for 25 years, all I've done is practice. It blows my mind that this summer I finally said out loud, I can't believe I didn't already know this. That's all I said out loud. Now, I could tell you what it was all about, but it's longer than even I talk, if that makes sense. But it's about needing things and about being willing to say them out loud, how it's okay to need or to ask for, and I don't do that. I don't like that. I don't want you to have to wait on me. I don't want you to, Becky, it drives her nuts. She'll say, I'm going to make a chicken salad sandwich. Do you want one? And Becky, what do I say? Nope. She comes back into the living room, sits down with her chicken salad sandwich. I get up, and I start going to the kitchen. She says, where are you going? And I say, I'm going to make a chicken salad sandwich. Now, why did I tell her I didn't want one? Because I don't want her to have to do it. But do you know what she says to me? It hurts me that you won't let me make it for you. There's no even sniff of a thought that I'm saying no because I want to hurt her feelings. It's the whole opposite. I don't want to offend. I don't want to take advantage of her kindness. I'm just like, I can do it. But what I couldn't believe through all the things we were learning this summer, what I can't believe I didn't already know is how completely in love we are. It's just ridiculous to have thought I'm sold out in love to her. And then somebody teaches me a clearer way of thinking and I realize, whoa, I love her more than I thought. And so I practice at the things that bring her joy. I practice at the things that she teaches me are special or matter to her. God asks all of us, learn what I ask and do it. So I don't like talking to people about Jesus because I don't know how to quote the Bible. I swear to you, I can't find a verse in the Bible that says, never mention my son unless you can quote a whole chapter. I can't find that. I keep looking because I at least want some justification for why we keep giving him that excuse. And so we try to help you. Oh, you just got to memorize the Roman road. Just, you don't have to like say it, but anybody in here ever heard of that? The Roman road of sharing, all men have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, but God, rich in mercy, and he sent Jesus while we were yet sinners. Christ died. And if any man confess with his mouth, why do you got to memorize all that? Why can't you just tell them who Jesus is? You know what? And I've been told this so many times in my life, and the older I'm allowed to get, the more true it is. Everybody can question everything you've ever learned, but they can't question what you've done and what you've experienced, because you did it. I can tell you what it looks like in now I can't remember what is it called? What is that visitor center? The Alpine Visitor Center, over 11,000 feet above sea level in the Rocky Mountain National Park. I can tell you what it looks like up there. I can tell you how you feel when you get out of your car up there. Can't even get into the visitor center. You're like having to walk up the parking lot, which is the tiniest little hill. And I'm like, oh, we got to slow down. I mean, it's so high. I'm not used to that. I'm a big fat man. I'm used to my air making me wet on my face before it enters my lungs. You know what I'm talking? It's humid and sweaty. And up there, there's no water, no nothing. You're above the timberline. You're above all this stuff. Okay, I've been there. You can say, I don't actually think he's been there. I got the pictures to prove it. You can't question what I have experienced, because I was there. So why do you think somebody can question what Jesus has done for you? That's all you got to do. Just tell them what he did. And here's the problem. Because he didn't pull you out of the mafia, or you didn't find Jesus with a heroin needle in your arm, you think, oh, but my story isn't that impressive. You ever notice that? Some guy stands up here and he talks about how he did 11 years in prison for rape and attempted murder. But while he was in jail, he found a Bible and he read it, and God got a hold of his heart. And then he started leading a Bible study, and then he got out, and now he started this ministry. And boy, you sit in the audience and you hear that like, man, God got a hold of that dude. Man, listen to that testimony. That's powerful. Boy, that stirs me up. And then somebody says, oh, you tell your testimony. I've just always been in church and do. And you act like that's dirt. How about saying, you know what? My testimony is the testimony of what a life looks like when the family is established on this truth. So you didn't find me with a heroin needle in my arm because I lived in a family that guarded me against those things, and through God's grace, I didn't take that path. Well, that's just as powerful, because it's God who kept me out of that mess, just like it's God who pulled him out of his. You see? But we don't want to talk about it. Why? You got to practice at that. You got to talk about these things. We've been told a lie that you're supposed to keep this stuff quiet. And you don't tell me about having a healthy marriage, because marriage is a tool just to keep you down. That's a tool of the man to keep you trapped, lady. You're better off without him. You don't need no man, right? In fact, what is a man? In fact, lady, what's a woman? In fact, are we even here? The world wants to make you believe that we've all lost minds. We don't have truth anymore. We don't have anything factual. And we don't have a response to that because we quit practicing the truth. Never mind, that's such a stupid example. I'm not going to say it. My wife would even be embarrassed of me if I said that one, I think. Okay, last one. Commitment is time and work combined. So if I allow those things, then the commitment allows me to learn to walk in the same direction. This is advice I wish I could give to every single married couple, whether they've been married longer than me, less than me, or the exact same amount of time as me. I'm willing to bet, I won't always be right, so I'll lose, but I'll be right more than I'm wrong, so that means I win. I'd be willing to bet most every fight that's ever occurred in your relationship with your spouse over the years you've been together, I'm willing to bet that argument stemmed from the fact that you thought the other one was purposely trying to hurt you. That they did something, it hurt your feelings, and you just received that they meant to do it that way. You meant to hurt me by saying that. You meant to hurt me by forgetting that. You meant to. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not here to justify physical abuse. By the way, if you are a physical abuser, I wish you would mature, grow up, and be an actual human being. That means to hurt. But praise God, it's not yet some sort of statistical majority that we're all being physically abused in our relationships. However, when you come home and she forgot to take that thing out of the freezer so that it would thaw for dinner, or he bought the wrong thing that you asked for and he always gets it wrong anyway, or he worked late yet again, when you defaultly think they meant to do that to hurt you, you're not walking the same direction. You're playing tug of war. You're pulling against one another. In Matthew 6:33, right there in the core of the Sermon on the Mount, and holy smokes, when I think about the number of times I've quoted from Bible verses up here, surely the Sermon on the Mount wins for getting the most references. I love that passage. I love Matthew 5, 6, and 7. I love it. In Matthew 6:33, though, very famous, but seek first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness, and then all of these things will be added to you. I need you to know that in Greek, seek is plural, neutral. In other words, that's a word that applies to everybody, and the way it's conjugated means continually. So, in other words, everybody continually seek God. Everybody continually work, move, walk, journey toward the Father. Everybody. Not husbands only, not wives only, not the sons only, not the stepchildren only. Everybody seek Him before you seek anything else. Now I'm going to tell you, as madly in love as I am with my wife, and Tuesday when I make 25 years, that's not 25 years of seeking God first. I wish I could tell you that, but if I told you that, I'd be lying. Because the truth is, if I'm in an honest mood, and I estimate fairly, my wife married an unmatured boy. Because I wanted the same thing most young men want in a wife, and I wanted stupid things. Like, I'll give you an example. Remember getting a wedding registry? You remember that? And you go to the store. Okay, some of y'all, now you get married and you just go online and you make it on Amazon or you make it on Wall. Okay, but back in the day, you had to go into the actual store. I remember going with her to Target, and they handed us this big scan gun. And we had to walk through Target, and anything we wanted on our wedding registry, we had to beep, scan it. Beep, beep, and it added it to this giant list. And then people could come in and ask Target, hey, I want to look at Mason and Becky's wedding registry, and they would get a list of the things we had scanned or whatever. Seems archaic by today's standards, right? Well, I remember that one of the things I adamantly wanted scanned was a coffee maker. But in 1998, when Mason and Becky were getting married, guess what I didn't drink? I did not drink coffee. Not one drop. Because coffee was disgusting. The only way I would drink coffee, if I even wanted to take the time to make it, which was a humongous pain before Keurig came along, was if I could pour 3/4 milk, blip, of some coffee, and then sugar. That's the only way I was drinking that stuff. But I wanted a coffee maker. And I wanted her to make it. And Once she made it, I wanted her to pour a cup and bring it to me. And let me say it one more time, I don't drink coffee during this time. Period. But I want that coffee maker on our list. And when we get married, I want you to make it in the morning and bring me a cup. And she said, why? Like a dagger in my heart. What do you mean, why? What? Now, if we break apart all of those details, I don't drink coffee, which means we will never need a coffee maker, which means having a coffee maker on that list is taking up space for something we might actually need, like a toaster or a set of silverware or whatever else. But I don't have, where's my coffee maker? Why? Because every day of my life, every day, my mother made coffee and took a cup to my dad while he read the newspaper. I don't drink coffee. I want to be loved like that. That's what I meant. That's what I meant when I said, I want a coffee maker. But I didn't know how to say that. I didn't know how to say, I want to be loved the way Mom loves Dad. Why? I hadn't had time. I hadn't put in work. I didn't know how to say these things. I didn't know that my mom did that, but let me tell you what I bet. She's sitting right there, so she'll tell me if I'm wrong. I didn't ask. I bet she didn't do that when they first got married. I mean, that was like 40-something years ago, so that's not fair, isn't it? 52, they're mummies. They are ancient. October 8th is 53? 2. Oh, so you're like, Becky, you cheat. They get to one and they're like, they skip to the next, and I don't know which one I am. I'm like, am I 45 or 46? Because she'll start saying the next one. 52 years, so that's fine. But I bet an 18-year-old mom did not make coffee for a 20-whatever-year-old dad because he was too busy working, making money, and being upset because he didn't have enough. Until he got old enough to realize that wasn't the whole point of existence. You know who taught him that lesson, according to him? Me. I didn't even know I was teaching him anything. I just hung out with Mom from 0 to 5 years old. And he said, I came home when you were born and you turned 5. One trip. And I realized, oh no, not anymore. See, suddenly, Mom was having to work and walk in a different direction because all he was obsessed with was money. Becky was having to deal with a kid who couldn't tell her what he actually wanted, and so that fed into, well, if you don't do those things, you must not love me, and if you don't love me, I don't love you back, because I'm not going to love you unless you love me. And so we're going to fight about all the silly little stupid little things, and I'm going to make a big deal out of small things, like you want me to take the garbage out? Why? Why don't you take the garbage out? And then she's going to do that thing that all wives do, like, I've taken it out 12 times already, why don't you take it out once? I'm like, don't bring your facts into this argument, okay? I'm sick of having to be the one that punishes your son. You need to go in there. How come he's my son when he does something bad? See, you think we never had those kind of arguments? I hope you're not that dumb. I bet we've had some passionate discussions that would embarrass y'all to think, I can't believe my pastor acted like that kind of an idiot. But I'm telling you, I am an idiot. Then I read the Bible where Jesus said, excuse me, but let me ask you a question. Can a blind man lead another blind man? And when I read that, I realized his point is, if you both act blind, then the only thing guaranteed is you're both falling in a hole. But if one of you will have some sight, both of you stay out of it. And I was asking her to be a seer too long. Heard a sermon from Ephesians chapter 5. Everything about my understanding in marriage changed. And then I stumbled through my own Bible study of Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 9. Said at weddings all the time. 2 are better than 1. Now I tell people all the time, I am the most awesome dude I have ever met. Macy's going to be in my Bible class this year. No, Amelia's in the 7th. There's going to be all these Grace kids in my Bible class. Macy's heard it. She doesn't have it memorized, I'm sure. I got 3 rules in my class. 1, Dr. Joy is in charge. 2, I do not put up with bullying. 3, reference rule number 1. Those are my 3 rules. And after I clarify my rules with him, I say, now let me make sure you understand one thing. I am the most awesome person I know. But that's not exactly true. She is. She taught me how to walk in the right direction because I need you to understand something. Every profoundly powerful example of God's unwavering love for me has come from that woman. Until her, it was coming from that woman. But every time I have been at my absolute weakest, there she is. Every time I have needed to understand grace, I have learned it from her. Every time I have needed an example of receiving mercy, he has reminded me of that mercy by using her mercy. Every time I've struggled, in fact, I can give you an example of even yesterday. Yesterday, something was bending me out of shape with me and my children and some behaviors and some discussion and whatnot. And I text, and by the way, I text like a Gen Z person so that I can have stuff in common with my kids. So I text and say, I am tripping, which means I am freaking out. And I tell why I'm tripping, and then I end it with, I am serious tripping. After I hit send, about 20 seconds later, my phone is ringing, and all my wife says is, tell me what's wrong. Now hear me, she didn't say man up. She didn't say quit being stupid. She didn't say act like a husband. She didn't say you need to father them. She didn't say anything. She said, all her words were, what's wrong? What she said was, everything you feel right now is valid. Share it with me. Because we walk the same way. We're always going the way he tells us to go. But you struggle because you're pulling against something else. And I'm not talking about little things like where y'all want to go to lunch. Oh, Wendy's. No, I was actually thinking about Burger King. Now you're going to fight over that. That just means we have lots that we can work on. I mean, like when the chips are down, when it all looks bad, when everything's rough, when the dirt is covering everything and we're filthy, what's the way out? I'm broken. I'm crying in the middle of the night. Someone has said something that cut me open. Someone has done something that I think I can't recover from. I have heard people say things about me that are so untrue, and yet I'm tempted to believe them. But what if I don't even know myself the way I think? All of the awful things I've ever survived, hers is the hand that reaches out to hold mine. And so in that moment, and in every moment like that, she is teaching me about him. And it's for her to tell you whether I am reciprocating that well. But I make it my life's mission to be the kind of husband that reflects the exact kind of disciple I want to be. And I can be that way because in my marriage, 2 are better than 1. And in my discipleship, I am nothing without him because 2 are better than 1. He makes me whole, and my gift is to be allowed to walk in the same direction as him. Come and let us reason together. Go and do likewise. Come to me, all ye who labor and are heavy laden. Peter, what you do for a living? I fish. No, follow me, and I will make. All of the times that God says, come walk my direction. That's the call of commitment. Because commitment is time, and it's work. It's 2 things that we struggle to want to give. Nothing ever works out. I've heard people say that a lot. Nothing ever works out. Every day something is working out. Every day something good is happening. Your calling is to find it. I remember the story I read one time after the tornado had hit us. I remember reading about how to deal with disaster and destruction and difficulty, because I've never exactly felt the way I felt standing in this parking lot with absolutely no clue what was going to be asked of me or what we were supposed to be doing. And I remember reading about every 70 and 80s kid's neighbor. Hello, neighbor. You know who that is? Mr. Rogers. And I don't know, the internet has to tell all these terrible things like he ate babies or so. They got to ruin somebody's reputation. It's so weird. But I remember reading from an interview where he was inspired to do the things he did because as a young man, as basically a child, something terrible had happened and he was upset and scared, and his mother said, "Look for the helpers. They will always be there. Look for the good. Look for the ways in which your commitment has borne fruit that couldn't have happened without time." Can I tell you something that only a handful of people will know I'm telling the truth about? In fact, I could name those people. The church that you sit in and are serving as a part of today is not the church that existed here 13 years ago. We use the same building. We occupy the same community. The land is the same shape and size. But the mistake everyone makes in America is to define a church by how the brick looks on the outside. But the church is what occupies the pews on the inside. And this is not what I came to. This isn't because of Mason, by the way, but the commitment of Mason, along with everybody else who's here, has seen a mustard seed become a bush. And there are plenty who nest in it. What I know is it can be bigger. It's another little thing I'll end with that Jesus talks about a mustard seed. He says if you have it, you could tell a mountain to move. I can't move a mountain. The reason I bring that up is because look at how much we accomplish. And our faith isn't even the size of a mustard seed, apparently. Was Jesus being literal? No. There is no gauge by which you take your faith out and go, whoop, still not as big as a mustard seed. I guess Mount Everest is safe. That's not how that works. What Jesus was trying to do was make sure everybody knew in their own hearts that what you fight with more than you realize is doubt. You fight with, can I? Should I? Ought I? If God said so, please tell me who is there to say no. Who says it? He has called us to be committed. And so Tuesday, wherever you are, I hope you remember that woman has put up with this for 25 years. And I love her madly. I would bleed, suffer, and die. And the reason I know that is because he taught me by example. This is the end of the road. This is what all of love looks like. That there's nothing of me that can't be given for her. Just like there's nothing of me that I won't give for him. Just like there was nothing of him that he wasn't willing to give for me. Commitment. Staying the course. Growing the roots. But I want it to happen tomorrow. It won't. But it will happen. It will happen. If you trust that small things over time will become big. If you trust that as you practice at this, you get better and better and better. And if you will see in your own relationships as married people, or in the relationships of family members in this house, or in the relationships you have outside here, or especially the relationship you have with God Almighty, our job in our commitments are to walk together, not opposed. Because the truth is, I want what's best for you. Anything I say or do that communicates otherwise, I have misspoken or you have misheard. Because I want to walk together. When we do that, unbelievably amazing things take place. And I am the beneficiary of all that good, and I like it. More time with her than without her. More time we've had with you than apart from you. And what comes next? But I'll go if you'll go, and I'll go if you don't. Let's pray. Father, you knit things together. You make awesome possible. And maybe greedily, from a position that others don't share, I can stand here before you and before this cloud of witnesses and say that I am desperately devoted to you, and that I exercise that devotion in part in the fullness by which I pour love over my wife and over my children. For 28 years whole and 25 of those married, you have given me a partner unlike any other, that both knowingly and unknowingly would reflect Jesus Christ in every corner of my life. And so for her and her good, I glorify you. But I confess that I recognize she is exactly that, a reflection of the greater good that can be found in my Savior. And I also confess that what I know from her, others can and are in the process of learning from special and important people in their lives. I pray you would give us the desire to recognize that, to say something and to celebrate it publicly, but that we would be hungry from now on to let our commitment be known, the commitment we have to you and to the calling you have over our hearts. I know and testify that a lot of amazing and wonderful things can happen in 25 years when we are committed. So would you allow us to look with the same heart for togetherness at this church, at your Son, and desire those same commitments. No matter how much time it takes, Lord, may you find us faithful in all things. Amen.